right, is everybody ready? Anybody waiting on anybody? We're okay? Very good. All right, thank you all for being here. This is the DAO's weekly press conference, which we are holding essentially every Monday this year around 1 o'clock. As always, we have a main topic, but we also have an update on gun violence for the prior week. We will be following that format. Our main topic is a little bit different because it will be a more general discussion around gun violence, and it will include some discussion of the February 17th incident at Broad and Olney in which 8 people were shot at that corner. To the extent we are able to talk about that ongoing investigation, we will have a few words. I want to acknowledge some of the staff members, community stakeholders, and others who are present. First Assistant Robert Listenby is present here. Assistant District Attorney Chesley Lightsey, who is the chief of our homicide and non-fatal shooting unit, is here. We are blessed to have Councilmember Jamie Gauthier, who has been very vocal about the importance of long-term solutions to gun violence in Philadelphia, and we'll have a few words. We have Police Chief Thomas Nestel of SEPTA and the SEPTA Police Department, whose agency is engaged in this investigation and works with us as a law enforcement partner on a regular basis. We have Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash here of the Philadelphia Police Department and Chief Inspector Frank Venor of the Philadelphia Police Department, who is also involved in the investigation and will be available and have a few words during this press conference. We are the invitees of Dr. Veronica J. Joyner, who is the founder and chief operating officer of the Mathematics, Civics, and Sciences School of Philadelphia, where we are. This is a school with a remarkable record. I have had the opportunity to speak to Dr. Joyner in reference to a newsletter showing some of the accomplishments, and also a longer document showing some of the incredible achievements of graduates here and the excellent education they receive. This is also a school that has been touched by gun violence, and Dr. Joyner may discuss that. And I mean touched in a very painful and deep way. That involves the shooting over time of some 4 different students. We have Pastor Carl Day here, who is the senior pastor of Culture Changing Christians, and may have a few words to offer as well. Let me move first to the gun crimes update, and this would be for the week February the 14th through February the 20th. So the homicides year-to-date in Philadelphia are 74. This is an increase over last year, although it is consistent with the level of homicides since the beginning of the pandemic. Since the beginning of the pandemic in March of last year, we have seen a terrible spike in homicides and by gun, and also in shootings. That spike in terms of homicides amounts to about 1.5 fatalities per day. It's almost exactly the same average that we have seen for the first part of this year during the pandemic. I have a message for anyone who is considering carrying a gun illegally, a message for anyone who's thinking of purchasing a gun illegally, for anyone who is thinking about shooting another person. This is not okay. You will be held accountable. Our office, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, has an 85% conviction rate. Right before the pandemic started, an 85% conviction rate for shootings and homicides, the highest rate that I've seen in the prior 5 years. We are very, very serious about that, and we intend to hold you accountable if you are arrested and if you are brought to us, because that is what we do. That is the work we do, and we do that work very well. I also have a message for the community, and that is that I'm committed to working with City Council, the mayor, faith leaders, and community organizations to develop short and long-term solutions to addressing this public health and safety crisis. This is not a choice between enforcement and prevention. This is a choice of intelligent prevention and intelligent enforcement. This is not an either or. This is a yes and. We will continue to diligently work with our law enforcement partners to identify and, where appropriate, investigate and prosecute the people who are driving gun violence in Philadelphia. It is not fair to senior citizens, youth, parents, families, faith institutions, and other stakeholders for our communities to live in fear and to live in danger over what, at times, are the most trivial conflicts. Ensuring public safety is our priority, and finding resources for gun violence prevention is our priority. Make no mistake, Philadelphia has a chronic problem with violent crime, a chronic, decades-long problem with violent crime. As with all other major cities, it is exacerbated by this pandemic, but it is chronic. The long-term solutions have not been there. The prevention has not been there. We are not looking for a solution in time for an election. We are looking for long-term solutions. And so we are happy to have available here some people who I think have quite a bit to say on those issues. I'd now like to move on to discuss the Broad and Olney mass shooting to the extent we can, because it is a pending investigation. And in the following order, I'm going to invite some of our speakers here to come forward and say a few words. They are first, SEPTA Police Chief Nestel, second, Chief Inspector Frank Venor, and third, First Assistant DA Liston B. Chief Nestel.
Good morning, Tom Nestel from the SEPTA Transit Police. The violence crisis in Philadelphia is daunting. It's affecting people in many ways. It's affecting people like the 70-year-old shooting victim who is probably now afraid to leave his house. The business owners, the newsstand operator, makes it difficult to do business safely. It makes it tough for SEPTA to keep its employees and passengers safe. I wanted to let people know what we did to try to prevent this mass shooting. On that day, there were 3 transit police officers assigned to the Olney Transportation Center. When they heard the gunfire, they ran towards it and they found mayhem. They assisted in loading 2 victims into a passing medic. They got patrol cars to take 2 other victims, race them to Einstein Hospital, and they began searching for witnesses. In the meantime, a undercover task force had been working in the area. 2 transit police officers are part of that task force. One of those officers saw a person with a gun, chased him to 15th and Olney, where that person was apprehended, still armed with a gun. No use of deadly force was used to apprehend that person. You know, it's frustrating to know that we had police officers present, and I know that the Philadelphia Police Department did too. I'm speaking solely for the transit police. We had police officers present, and it didn't stop this. You know, anger and revenge is now overtaking the dignity of life, and that has to change.
Good afternoon. I'm Chief Inspector Frank Venor from the Detective Bureau in the Philadelphia Police Department. I'll go over briefly most of the details that I'm going to go over. You have some part of. But on Wednesday, February 17th at approximately 2:50 in the afternoon, what we know is the 8 victims were standing somewhere on the north side of Olney Avenue, right around 13th Street, when shots rang out. As Chief Nestel had said, Philadelphia Police, SEPTA Police responded, ran towards the gunfire. 2 people were stopped during those encounters, and both of them had guns, and both of them were carrying the guns illegally. They were arrested and charged. Now, this investigation is still active, as the District Attorney said, so it's ongoing. What we know is, we know right now we can't piece those 2 individuals to the shooting. However, we're not positive of who did the shooting yet. So we have a lot of pieces to the puzzle. but we know we need the public's help to connect all the pieces. So what we're asking for, we're collecting video, we're collecting other evidence, not only from that area, but we're going in surrounding area. We know people have Ring cameras, they have cameras connected to vehicles, cell phones. If someone captured something that day, we urge them to give Northwest Detectives a call our tip line, and give the information so we could put this investigation definitely where it needs to be and get the people responsible for shooting the individuals. We had victims from 17 to 70. Luckily, because of the quick work of the officers that responded and the hospital that we were right next to, it appears all the individuals are going to survive their injuries, so it's a very good thing. However, we need to know who was brazen enough to fire that gun that day, so we could definitely make sure that the district attorney could prosecute them.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Listenby. I'm First Assistant for District Attorney Krasner. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you briefly about the services offered by the District Attorney's Office for victims and witnesses of crimes in the city and county of Philadelphia. It is the mission of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office to raise the voices of all victims and witnesses through inclusion, information sharing, and advocacy during the criminal trial process. Our staff, through our Victim Services Unit, strives to help victims and witnesses understand their rights under the law and exercise those rights while receiving compassionate and respectful treatment. We strive to complete our mission through commitment to our values. Those values are compassion, integrity, and reliability. We're responsible for and committed to advocating and upholding the rights of victims in Philadelphia and doing our very best to ensure that victims feel supported and heard throughout the criminal justice process. The director of our Philadelphia District Attorney's Office Division of Victim Services is Keziah Cameron, who is a veteran of over 17 years of service as a victim advocate. Her very able assistant supervisor is Ms. Donna Woods. They are dedicated to providing direct and personal services to victims and their families and support to all crime victims and witnesses in Philadelphia. We consistently advocate for victims to be heard through every stage of the process and ensure their voices are considered in every critical decision. Through all the work we do as victim advocates is important. Our most important role is that of the victim's voice during a time when it often feels as if many people are trying to take their voice away. These victims encounter a system that is very complex and often confusing. It is the job of the Victim Services Unit to explain the process. It is our job to walk with them through this experience and to ensure their presence is felt and their voice is heard. It is incumbent upon each of us to remember and recognize that each victim has his or her own experience, that what may be troubling to one person may be completely traumatic to another individual. Let there be no doubt it has been challenging to live up to these responsibilities during the pandemic, which has been almost a year. And indeed, there are many areas where we are striving to improve. Nevertheless, last year, for the calendar year 2020, our Victim Services Unit provided services to over 65,000 victims, witnesses, and their families. We recognize that what happens to individuals happens not just to them, but to their families, and also to their communities. Whenever there is a shooting, or particularly a mass shooting like the one we had last week, all of our families, my family included, come to me and say, what is going on and what can be done to stop this violence? During the early phases of the pandemic, most of our staff were working in our office because we were not able to provide them with the equipment they needed to work remotely. More recently, we've been able to provide them with electronic equipment so that many of them can work remotely and at home. In spite of our best efforts, there's still room for improvement. The District Attorney's Victim Services Unit is comprised of 30 full-time victim service advocates assigned to the various units across the office. Even with limited staffing, they have worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic, both in the office and remotely, providing aid and services, making sure victims, witnesses, and their families stay informed, providing up-to-date information, and answering their questions. Sometimes these victims and witnesses are threatened. The District Attorney's Office, working in conjunction with the Attorney General's Office, is able to help in relocating some victims and some witnesses. This can happen when a law enforcement agency or our assistant district attorneys advise us that there is a real or perceived threat to the safety and well-being of a victim, a witness, or their families. The DAO works closely again with the Attorney General's office, which provides statewide funding for relocation, and it is our priority to try and do everything we can to address the threats that they may encounter. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to come forward as a witness to a violent crime, and that is why we are extremely committed to making sure we do all that we can do to make sure those individuals and their families are safe and stay safe. We have, in this area where this crime occurred in Olney, the Northwest Victim Services organization serves that unit, that area, and Ms. Melanie Wilson asked me to make the following comment on her behalf. She's reached out to all the victims to offer services for unpaid medical bills, lost wages, and therapy. If there are any witnesses at the Broad Street shooting and they are in need of free therapy services, they can contact the executive director of the Northwest Victim Services Unit, Melanie Nelson, directly at 267-808-0350. That is 267-808-0350. When the shooters are apprehended, an advocate from the Northwest Victim Services will attend court with the victims and witnesses. Thank you.
All right, shortly we will hear from 3 more speakers, beginning with Councilmember Gautier. I would be negligent if I did not send snowy greetings to Councilmember Sherelle Parker, who from the very beginning of first receiving notice of this incident has been in close communication with my office about Broad and Olney, who has received updates and has had questions. She was invited to be here today, scheduling did not permit it. But nevertheless, I hope she will accept my snowy greetings. We do have Councilmember Jamie Gautier here, who has been very articulate on the issue of long-term solutions to gun violence in the city of Philadelphia. I would love to have several of her colleagues, but in an era of social distancing, it's simply not possible. And so as we go through these different press conferences during this year, if you see one or you see another, it's not because we picked one over another. It's because we have to observe social distancing and be safe in what we are doing. This is not a Donald Trump super spreader event. So I will ask Councilmember Gautier to come forward, followed by Dr. Joyner, and followed by Pastor Carl Day. After that, we'll be taking questions from the media. Councilmember?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councilmember Jamie Gautier, and I represent the 3rd District, which includes large parts of West and Southwest Philadelphia. I want to thank District Attorney Larry Krasner for inviting me to the DAO's weekly press briefing to say a few words, and for the transparency that his office is bringing to the issue of gun violence in our city through these press briefings. I also want to commend Majority Leader Parker for all of the work that she's done to make Olney and her entire district safe, both before and after this incident. Last week's shooting near the Olney Transportation Center is an example of gun violence not only as a public health emergency, but as a racial justice issue. On a Wednesday afternoon, in broad daylight, people traveling to and from work or just going about their daily lives were injured by gunfire. Many others were traumatized. The incident adds to the already too long list of Philadelphians shot or killed in the Black or brown communities that they reside in or traverse through. People gathering at rec centers or at parks. Kids playing on their own sidewalks or on their porches. Men and women driving. And just a heartbreaking, staggering amount of young Black men. In 2020, 86% of those that we lost to gun violence in this city were Black people. And the pain and trauma caused by these shootings reverberates through Black and brown communities, creating victims and co-victims for years to come. Gun violence in Philadelphia is a public health emergency. People dying in our streets every day is an emergency. People being afraid to undertake their daily activities or feeling like their cries for help are going unanswered is an emergency. And that's why in September of last year, I put forward a resolution imploring Mayor Kinney to declare gun violence a citywide emergency, and was honored to have the overwhelming support of City Council. Today, I thank DA Krasner for his support, and I also am grateful for his partnership in creating a more urgent, comprehensive response to this crisis that's ravaging our neighborhoods. I look forward to Mayor Kinney's partnership too in approaching this emergency with the treatment that it deserves. Last week, the mayor pledged to fulfill our resolution, but last week's incident in Olney is just the latest example of why we need to move quickly. I ask that the mayor join DA Krasner and others in providing weekly public press briefings to inform our residents about our city's ongoing efforts to address this crisis in a manner that's similar to our city's daily COVID briefings. I ask for the implementation of additional community-level violence prevention and intervention efforts with greater speed, transparency, and effectiveness. I ask that our city implement proven gun violence reduction programs that have worked in other cities across the country, and that we do that with urgency. And that we mobilize our city's agencies as well as our dynamic economy, the business community, healthcare organizations, foundations, nonprofit organizations, to ensure that we are tapping into the incredible wealth of resources at our disposal to address this problem. City Council and DA Krasner have supported and endorsed this course of action. 1,300 Philadelphians have signed a petition asking for our city to undertake this course of action. Longtime activist Jamal Johnson went on a 26-day hunger strike, putting his body and his health on the line to ask our city to undertake this course of action. The only thing left now is for us to move forward and for our entire city as a whole to step up and treat this crisis with the priority and level of resources that it deserves. Let us not wait for the next mass shooting to act. Public safety is the most urgent and fundamental human need. And it is the responsibility of government to act in concert with community in creating that sense of safety and security. Today, I pledge my commitment to working to ensure that we have safe communities, safe, well-supported communities where our people can not only exist but thrive. And I look forward to working with my partners across city government to reach that goal. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank our DA, Krasner, for his support of this school. There has been about 2 years that he has had his staff in here working to try to solve some of the problems. There are many pieces to this puzzle. There is a major breakdown in our city. There is a breakdown in the home, the family. There is a breakdown in our schools. There is a breakdown in the community. We don't have the activities supported for our youth. A gun will sit. It is the person that picks the gun up that we have a problem with in this city. We now have to look at what are we doing for the students. The father of crime is unemployment. The mother of crime is a lack of education. When we put these two pieces together, you will see that changes will be made, and very quickly. I have been 50 years in the field of education, and those two components are missing. This school teaches children civics. We teach them to be kind. We have a homeless program. We do a voter registration drive. I have the highest graduation rate for 8 consecutive years in my cohort. I have the highest college placement for 8 years in my cohort, and also have the highest college completion. These children are not out creating a crime. They are the ones becoming police officers, military forces, teachers, doctors, lawyers, and these are low income. 80% of my population is low income. And until we address the breakdown in the family, the breakdown in the schools, and the breakdown in the communities, we will continue to produce criminals. Remember, the father is unemployment, poor training, and the mother is a lack of education. Once those two components are addressed, we will then begin to see a reduction in crime in Philadelphia. And Mr. Krasner, I thank you again.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, just like to thank DA Krasner for his support, the preventative measures that the District Attorney's Office has taken. I do want to say this, as a father of 4, my oldest son, Carl Day Jr., is 17, and pre-COVID, if it had not been for the pandemic, he would have been at Broughton Island Station, leaving school. He frequents Broughton Island Station all the time, walks home from there at times. So in the work that I do, just consistently being tired and sick and tired of being tired of the violence in our city, it struck home, because when you have 7 people wounded, broad daylight, officers at the scene, Philadelphia, we have to realize that this is sick right now. So I'm deeply sad, and I hate having to come to these press conferences and discuss these matters. I appreciate the District Attorney's Office because, again, everything from the resources that they provide, whether it's the resource hubs, virtual resource hubs, my contact and constant communication with them on ways that they can get involved in some of the work that we're doing, and just also just being a listening ear and connecting with them in regards to some of the issues that the brothers have that are out there that are caught up in the web of violence. So I appreciate them giving that door to me to be a bridge and do what we have to do. And some of the work that we're doing and going forward as well. I say this to the faith community. Just like Councilwoman Jamie said, just in regards to city agencies working together, having a level of transparency, it is ultimately crucial right now, faith leaders of all faiths, that we start to unite, that we have to realize that this pandemic may not be going anywhere anytime soon. So in this virtual age where in which we're reaching our people are suffering right now. So we have to be innovative. So that means we have to get outside, because clearly snowstorms, pandemics, cold weather isn't deterring anybody from still creating in these acts of crimes. So y'all, we have to sit here and really build amongst each other. I'm currently mobilizing men across Philadelphia right now, and I just open that door of invitation to anyone of any particular faith to come out and join us. And it can be impromptu, doesn't even matter. We'll go anywhere you're at, and we'll do what we have to do to just really demonstrate the love that we're supposed to the core tenets of our faith. So please, y'all, we can't continue to just do this thing virtually. People are outside, people are dying. The preservation of life should go ahead and exceed everything that we're doing right now at this moment. So again, I'm also backing Councilwoman Jamie in regards to just everything that we're going through right now is the state of emergency. I also ask that local agencies work together, working through the nuances of what a state of emergency looks like in Philadelphia, because it would behoove me to not speak for the brothers that I am engaged in encountering out there, realizing that we have to be mindful too, that we won't put ourselves in a place where we're over-policing our communities as well, which may lead to or furthering, hindering the reform work that District Attorney Krasner's office have worked hard for too as well. So we have to build those bridges and bridge those gaps as well, and I'm here for it. I'm not paid by anybody. I'm certainly here because I care. So that's just what it is. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Pastor Day. and all of the excellent speakers. I love that expression about the mother and father of gun violence being unemployment and a lack of educational achievement, and I'm happy to report they're doing pretty well with their education right here. All right, at this point, we are ready to take questions. Those questions do not necessarily have to be for me. They can be for anyone up here. But let me start by saying, are there any questions about Broad and Olney?
At this point, what do police know about the shooter?
I'm going to invite my law enforcement colleagues forward, although I suspect they're going to say that there's a very limited amount that they can answer on that point because it is an ongoing investigation.
As I said before, we do have some direction. We do have a lot of evidence collected. We just don't have enough to connect that evidence and be able to say exactly who the shooter is. We know people out there know, and maybe just an anonymous tip may put us further along than we are. So I can't say exactly. It's a very active investigation, so I'm not going to name anybody because it wouldn't be fair to do that. We don't have enough evidence together to say anyone particular is a shooter.
Was the gunman captured on camera?
I don't know if the actual shooting is captured on camera. We do have some video that we recovered in the area, but what we need to know is who's who, and that's what we need to know. So that's where we're asking for the help.
Can you say you have a particular person of interest at this point, or?
We have direction. We have direction. I'm not going to say or name any person of interest.
Do you believe that any of the victims were the intended targets?
Well, I could say that the majority of them were not. The majority of them were not. If one was, we're still working to connect that.
And just to put on another note, the majority of the victims were innocent bystanders just waiting for the bus? Is that
That's right. Waiting for the bus. That's what we believe at this point. They were just there waiting for the bus.
How many would you say may be?
I don't want to say particularly, but what we know is that many of those people, of the 8 people, were just standing there when this all began.
The check cashing business now has an officer standing aside. Can you say why there was increased security in that particular business?
No, I'm not. I really don't know. So I would have to get back to you on that.
Captain, I'm sorry, but at Broad and Olney, that's the transportation hub, right? And I mean, the average person would ask, you mean that wasn't on camera?
There's a lot of video there, but that particular corner, closer to 13th Street, we don't have that captured, but we have a lot of video coming to and from. So, like I said, we just have to piece it together.
But the shooting itself, you know, was not recorded.
The shooting itself, I don't believe is captured on video, at least what I know right now. Like I said, there's a lot of video that we don't know about. If someone has something captured, we'd love to see it.
Just to clarify, 2 people were arrested with firearms at the scene, but you just can't connect them to the actual.
Right. At this point, we don't have them connected to the shooting. However, they're facing charges for having guns illegally on the street. Thanks.
All right, any other questions on Broad and Olney? No. Are there any other questions?
Well, just obviously, maybe you have already covered this, but what is your office doing specifically with the police department to find who did this?
Chesley, would you care to address that? Chesley Lights, he is our Chief of Homicide and Non-Fatal Shootings.
So this matter would be coming directly from the police department through our charging unit. We have a 24-hour group of experienced ADAs who work in that unit. So all of the warrants that would be asked for, whether that be for personal cameras, any searches that might happen of cars or otherwise, would come specifically through our charging unit. So that is how we would work with the police. What I can tell you is what was mentioned earlier is that 2 folks were arrested with guns after this shooting. The arrest for those 2 people was approved directly from our office. Our office asked the bail commissioners for $999,999 of bail. We did not receive that amount. However, they both did have high bail. And Mr. Krasner, I don't have those numbers. Do you have the exact bail numbers that we did get in that matter? So the numbers that we did get on bail for those folks were $250,000 and $400,000 for, different for each of them. Those folks were convicted felons who were not allowed to possess firearms anywhere legally.
And just to clarify on that, but those two weapons were not fired, correct?
At this point, I can't say for sure that that's true. We do not, as I'm standing here, know that those weapons were fired. So that is part of an ongoing investigation. I don't want to speak for the police department, but we believe that the answer to that question is no, but I couldn't say that with 100% certainty.
All right, are there any other questions on that topic? Are there any questions on any other topic?
Yeah, I just, the victims, were there 7 or 8?
My recollection is that it was initially believed there were 7, and then an 8th walked himself in for medical treatment and was identified on that basis. Is that correct? Yes. Okay.
Okay, do we know, are any of them still hospitalized?
One?
Is
Are-
that the 71-year-old man? And what's his condition?
I don't have that information at this time. I know that there was one who was the most seriously injured, and that he has been hospitalized for a longer period of time. I don't have specifics on his condition right now.
Maybe this one's for the police officers also. What are tips like? I mean, have you been receiving any tips on this shooting? I mean, normal amount of tips, no tips? Give us the scope of the tip situation.
I'm not going to talk, I'm Ben Nash, Deputy for Investigations, and I can't tell you that we have or haven't gotten any specific tips on this matter. I can tell you that the challenge is that we don't get the tips that we would need. And on top of that, as you mentioned specifically, crowded afternoon, a hub of public transportation. There were people around. Now, everybody here, a lot of reference has gone back to COVID. And everyone in this gathering has a COVID mask on, and that's a significant impediment. And it's something that can't be understated. So while people may see an individual dressed in a certain way, they may not be able to see the face. And that has been a challenge that we've been faced with in law enforcement throughout the beginning of this pandemic. So when we're talking about tips, it doesn't always necessarily mean somebody that specifically saw something that would be helpful, but we also know that there are people who are involved in crimes that know other people who know that they were involved in crimes. And those are the tips that can help us to solidify the direction that we're going in. And while Chief Vanor spoke about direction, yes, we have direction. There are numerous investigative leads that we are following up on. We are doing everything we possibly can to bring this to a resolution where we hold people accountable for this terrible mass shooting. But sometimes we've also talked about families and friends and people. Somebody ought to be outraged about the fact that in the middle of our city in broad daylight, an individual, or in this case individuals, would go about deciding to open fire while people are gathered, going about their lives in order to get home or go to work. So to the question about tips, not enough. That's the answer.
Okay. Do we have any last questions on this topic? Or no? All right. Are there questions on any other topic?
Did you invite Commissioner Outlaw and Mayor Kenny to speak today?
We did invite Commissioner Outlaw. We are always happy to have the mayor if he'd like to be here. But in general, since we are doing this every week, let me put it this way. They both have a standing invitation, if their schedules permit, to be here for any of our weekly press conferences. We did specifically invite Commissioner Outlaw after there were some inquiries. And I did have an opportunity actually to speak to her over the weekend, in which I mentioned that there would be a press conference today.
What's your response to the backlash your office is receiving for having the roll of law officers covered?
You know, I have to, as we have been discussing now for almost 20 minutes, how we have to be responsible in rolling out information, either to protect witnesses, or to protect victims, or to protect the integrity of an investigative process. And we cannot treat this as a reality show. We have to be serious about what we're doing. I have to be serious in how I answer that question. I have to make sure that my answers do not violate the law, that they are not immoral, that they do not endanger. So I will endeavor to do that. My response is quite simply that I spoke to Commissioner Outlaw over this weekend in some detail. It was, as it usually is, a very constructive conversation. Commissioner is now aware of the details surrounding the temporary blockage of those photographs from public view, and it was temporary, and it was for reasons that are not only sound, but are also legally required. The Commissioner is aware of that. I then discussed with her the reality of the wall of remembrance and why it is there. And I made sure she is aware that when I came into office, it was there. I wanted it to stay there, which is not what we did throughout the office. There was a conference room named after a particular prosecutor who had a pretty bad record. We changed the name of that conference room.
Who's that?
Excuse me. There were photographs of prior district attorneys in one location, and someone had abducted a photograph of Seth Williams. And I thought it gave a very bad image of the office, that certain photographs were included and others were excluded. And so we moved them. We made some other changes. There were a couple plaques that were up that I thought, frankly, presented the wrong message to our staff. And we moved them. But among all these things, we chose not to move the wall of remembrance because we honor the service of these officers. We always have. We have, in my opinion, a very constructive and close collaboration with the police commissioner, with the brass of the Philadelphia Police Department, and with the vast majority of the rank and file, who do a good job and do it in a righteous way. That is how I see it. But what occurred during the pandemic is we were put in a position of having to use spaces, including our largest spaces, for purposes that were new, and we were required to do it in an unprecedented way. And that is why there had to be temporary coverage of those photographs at that time. Now, the commissioner is aware of all of that, but I want to make sure I complete the point, which is I discussed with her what's the best path moving forward, because we really only have two choices. And one is that we continue to do exactly what we were doing, which in my opinion is legally required and entirely appropriate, or that we relocate the wall of remembrance to another space where it is visible to people in the office, but where there will never be a necessity to cover it up. I mean, I suppose maybe if we're painting the wall, but otherwise there would never be a necessity to cover it up. She was on the same page with the second suggestion. And I think in that sense, it was constructive because the use of the room has changed. And if it is the police commissioner's position that it's better to avoid covering them even temporarily, I support that. So that is what the intention is. I can tell you that the details of the relocation have been discussed over the weekend and today with people in the DA's office who are members of the Fraternal Order of Police. Their suggestions will be very seriously considered, and we will be taking care of that. I think that that is about as much as it is appropriate for me to say on that at this time.
Do you regret the wall being covered?
I do not regret doing what is legally required.
Do you regret the wall being covered?
I do not regret doing what is legally required. I do think it's unfortunate that there are some people who see the wall of remembrance as being a political tool during a campaign cycle. And I think you all better strap into your seats and put on your seatbelts, because what you're about to see, unfortunately, will be some people who are much more interested in politics than they are in prosecution or policing, trying to use everything and anything as a Trumpian political tool. And I would also respectfully caution members of the media that we all have a responsibility, that our reporting be careful, and that we not endanger people, and that we not run afoul of the law in how we do our reporting. I'm not saying any of you have done that. That is not my point. But I'm saying we all have a moral responsibility to be careful in what we do when it concerns the safety of individuals, when it concerns compliance with the law. We all have that responsibility, and I appreciate your efforts to comply with that as well.
Since you brought the campaign, when are you going to announce your re-election candidate?
Mr. Dean, we did, not in the usual way, but we did. We did it the way most of these campaigns are being announced now, which is with a social media announcement. It was probably about a week or a week and a half ago that was put up. All right, thank you very much.
A lot of people feel disrespected. Can you just answer if you regret having that wall card? Mr. Krasner.
Ist das useless?